How the Green Berets trained Afghan guerrillas to fight the Soviets. How did a few dozen soldiers bring a global superpower to its knees? It seems impossible. But this is a bitter truth for the Soviets, and an unbelievable task in war history. In 1979, the world watched in disbelief as Soviet tanks stormed into Afghanistan. The Cold War, already on edge, seemed ready to explode. The Soviet Union, convinced of its strength, expected a quick and easy victory. But they didn't know that their biggest challenge wasn't the Afghan mountains. It was hiding in plain sight. Deep in those mountains, a small, elite group of American soldiers was already in action. Their mission was daring: to turn Afghan farmers and tribal fighters into a guerrilla army capable of taking on the mighty Soviet military. These soldiers, known as the Green Berets, were the U.S. Army's best-kept secret, and they were about to turn the Soviets' triumph into a nightmare. But how could so few, so quietly, wreak such havoc on one of the world's strongest armies? This is the untold story of how the Green Berets pulled off the impossible, turning Afghanistan into the Soviet Union's version of Vietnam that crippled their empire from within. Let's find out what happened. Chapter 1. The Secret Invasion. On Christmas Eve 1979, the Soviet Union launched a surprise invasion of Afghanistan. What was their goal behind it? Soviets wanted to install a puppet government and bring the country into their sphere of influence. With over 100,000 troops and advanced military technology, it seemed like a guaranteed victory. They expected Afghanistan to fall within months, but they didn't understand the land they were invading or the people they were about to face. The Afghan resistance was fierce, but the Mujahideen, as they were called, were ill-equipped, using outdated rifles and relying on sheer willpower. They needed more than courage to face one of the world's most powerful armies. They needed training, weapons, and tactics. That's when the United States saw an opportunity to strike at the heart of its Cold War enemy without ever stepping into a battlefield themselves. And they knew exactly who to send. Chapter 2. The Secret Arrival of the Green Berets. The Green Berets weren't the average soldiers. They were specialists in unconventional warfare, experts in sabotage, insurgency, and, most importantly, training others to fight. In 1980, under a top-secret CIA operation known as Operation Cyclone, the Green Berets quietly entered Afghanistan. Their mission was one of the most dangerous and delicate of the Cold War: to infiltrate the country, connect with the Afghan Mujahideen, and turn them into a highly trained guerrilla force capable of resisting and ultimately defeating the Soviets. These soldiers couldn't fight the Soviets directly. Instead, they became ghosts, slipping across borders, carrying supplies, and embedding themselves among the Afghan people. Every move was calculated, and every interaction was a delicate balance of trust and secrecy. One mistake could cost them their lives, or worse, and can trigger global warfare. Chapter 3. Training for the world's most brutal war. The Green Berets didn't just hand out weapons. They trained the Mujahideen to use guerrilla tactics that would frustrate and terrorize the Soviet forces. They taught them to strike hard and disappear into the mountains before the enemy could react. Ambushes, hit-and-run tactics, and sabotage were the art of asymmetrical warfare, and the Mujahideen quickly became masters. In the mountains, the Green Berets drilled their Afghan trainees in small unit tactics. They taught them how to operate in small groups, stay mobile, and use the terrain to their advantage. The Mujahideen became experts at setting traps, planting IEDs, sabotaging Soviet supply lines, and ambushing convoys with deadly precision. And when the U.S. provided them with Stinger missiles, capable of downing Soviet helicopters, the Soviet Army found itself fighting an invisible enemy that could strike at any time and vanish into thin air. Chapter 4. Destruction of Soviet Air Defense. By 1986, the Soviet Army was bleeding. Their helicopter gunships, once the terror of the battlefield, were being shot down by Mujahideen fighters, trained and armed by the Green Berets. These fighters, once simple farmers and herders, had become the Soviets' worst nightmare. The Green Berets had turned the tide with a single game-changing weapon, the Stinger missile. In 1 year alone, over 270 Soviet aircraft were shot down, crippling their air superiority and leaving their ground troops exposed. The psychological effect on Soviet soldiers was devastating. No longer did they dominate the skies. Now they were vulnerable. The tactics the Green Berets had taught the Mujahideen were working, and the Soviets were losing more than just helicopters. They were losing the war. Chapter 5. The Cost of Victory and the Soviet Collapse. After nearly a decade of war, the unthinkable happened. In February 1989, the Soviet Union began withdrawing its troops, their mission in Afghanistan a complete failure. They left behind 15,000 dead soldiers, a broken economy, and a shattered global image. The Soviet Union, which had seemed unshakable, was now crumbling. Its defeat in Afghanistan had pushed it one step closer to collapse. The Green Berets had accomplished their mission. They had trained an army of guerrillas that outlasted a superpower. But the victory came with a cost. Afghanistan was left in ruins, and the seeds of future conflict were already taking root. The same guerrilla fighters the Green Berets had trained would soon turn their weapons on each other, and eventually on the West. Ending. The Green Berets didn't just fight in Afghanistan. They helped change the direction of the war and the country's future. While they achieved victory, there were also some unexpected outcomes. What happened in those mountains didn't stay there, and the lessons from that time continue to affect today's world. The story of the Green Berets in Afghanistan is one of success, but it's also a reminder that the impact of war doesn't end when the fighting stops. It's a story still being written, and a lesson for us all.